Hello and welcome to another episode off of the Idaho Renaissance Fair Inc.'s YouTube page. So we are extremely excited. We have just one more week until our own personal event is starting. We are doing 2 weekends. This is a first for us, and we have so much that we are excited for. We have jousting, we have armored combat, we have belly dancers, we have storytellers, we have bards. We've got everything that a modern Renaissance fair should have. We have a queen, we have actors and actresses playing the parts of merchants, playing the parts of tradesmen. We have educational things going on where we have a hand weavers guild. They're going to have a loom, they're going to be knitting, they're going to be sewing. It's going to be such a great experience, both for the consumer and for the educational opportunity. But it does raise a question. How similar is a modern Renaissance fair compared to those of actual Renaissance fair era fairs? So we need to talk about that a little bit. Back in the day, they were living it. Like, that was modern time. It would be like a concert nowadays by Taylor Swift, or a technology show by Apple, something like that. A reason to get together to showcase the newest and the greatest. And that's what a Renaissance fair was doing. Specifically this year, we have a political scheme going on where people are trying to get in America elected to be the president. And that's a big thing. We have parties happening to celebrate one side or the other. People trying to convince. We have debates. All of these things that are big gatherings. That's what a Renaissance fair was. Now, they didn't always call them fairs, though. It depends on what was going on at the time. I'm going to focus specifically on Italy because that's where we base our fair at. And the reason I'm doing that is because different climates celebrated different ways. So in England, they would have different events and they would have different foods than in Spain, in Germany, in Italy, in Russia. So specifically in Italy, as you know, based off of the other videos that you've watched of ours, and if you know any of the Italian history, the Roman Empire by 1494 has collapsed. There are still segments of it left. You had your papal states. We had mostly big families that were running the states. We had the Medicis. That was a big one. We had the Sforzas. Historically, Shakespeare did pull from two very high-class noble families, the Montagues, the Capulets, stuff like that. They were historically based, just like in how a movie is put together these days. They take aspects of history, and for them, it was happening around that time. England was so far away from Italy, it was a foreign and just exotic and amazing thing to talk about. So Shakespeare put stuff together based off of that, just like how modern directors and modern producers put stuff together. It's the exact same. So your festivals, specifically, what we're talking about in Italy, these big families would go ahead and they would plan out a festival for whatever reason. Maybe they need to make a push. Hey, we want to show our money off. A lot of fairs happened because they wanted to show their money off. But there were also other reasons, such as weddings, such as christenings, such as if you happened to be getting ready for a war and you wanted to show off and help give people a last chance with their loved ones. There were tons of reasons to have a party. They just needed to find the excuse, much like we do. Hey, this person beat cancer. We're going to party for that. Hey, we just developed a new medicine. We're going to have a celebration for that. It was no different then. The way that they celebrated was, though. So nowadays, we put a big emphasis on safety. And they did to a degree, but it kind of depended on how you were participating in the event. So with Italian fairs, with Italian parties, what they would do is generally, for your larger cities, you had marketplaces. You had squares where people would come together and they would meet and dance and talk and eat, and they would have games. And these squares were large. And the reason they picked those places is because everyone knew about them. They knew where they were centrally located. All of your wealthy people generally lived right off of the market because it was convenient. People love convenience, even back then. So you would have these young women looking for husbands, and you would have these young men looking for wives. You would have people trying to vie for more political status. And if your family was the one that was putting on the party, you would have all of your horses. Horses were expensive. Well-trained horses were even more so. It was a matter of status. Hey, I've got all of my boys, and I've got them all dressed up in all the finery. Of course, I'm the head of the family. I'm going to be dressed the best. You know, this is my son. He's my boy. I'm going to have him dressed up with more ribbons and more tassels and things like that. I'm going to make him look amazing. He's going to be known as the lead of this event. And that showed how affluent your family was. It was showing off to the other families too. Ooh, look, we had a really successful harvest this year. Oh, look, we backed Columbus on his trip to the Americas, and he brought back these exotic creatures and these new cloths and these new fruits. It was an opportunity to flex. So you would have multiple course meals of soups, of salads, of sweetmeats, of regular meats. You would have large bonfires, and they would warn common people that this would happen. They would go to neighboring states, they would go to neighboring cities and tell them, hey, we're doing this thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got knights coming in, we got soldiers coming in, we've got displays of acrobatics happening, gymnastics, we have tumbling, we have dancing. Back in 1415, there was a dance party so big that they had 600 female dancers alone. And they had prizes, monetary, cloth. They did... They actually had a rather large population boom, so the party was extremely successful on multiple levels. And they would invite dignitaries from neighboring countries. Hey, come trade with us. Look at what we got. Look at our wares. Look at our beautiful women. Look at our handsome men. See how wonderful our culture is. It was an excuse to show off, and it was well received by many. Let's talk about some of the sports they would do. Of course, you would have wrestling. You would have different levels of sword play. You know, showing off your expertise. A lot of people think, oh, but what about the horrible accidents? What about the people who died? The idea, politically speaking, especially back then, you didn't want to kill your opponent. You wanted to embarrass your opponent. You wanted to show your skill over your opponent. And if you could do that, you established dominance for your family, for your group. And that was much more important than killing your enemy, you know, whoever that may be. Oh, he insulted my sister and destroyed her honor. He's got to die. There were things like that happened, but a lot of times it would be a duel, and it never happened at a party. Like it should not have happened at a party. That's how we should say it. People didn't want to see death of the regular people, nor of their nobility. Now, that being said, if you were in an armored combat thing and you lost an eye, you lost a limb, you got horribly maimed, you know, it was better for the opponent because it showed his skill, it showed his ability. Obviously, you couldn't defend yourself because this person was so strong and so powerful, and it gave them credit, it gave them accolades. And that's what men of the time, that's what they were going for. Women were very competitive as well, of course, just like they are today. You wanted to show your grace, your beauty, your strength. Women were very strong. And at the time, when they were looking for husbands of political standing, or they were looking for ways of raising their status, so they were trying to marry themselves a rich husband in one aspect or another, you had to show your vitality. You had to show that you were healthy enough that you could possibly survive childbirth. Back in the day, the medicine wasn't where it is today, and we still lose a lot of babies. We still have a lot of mothers that die in labor. Back then, it was much more common and much more feared. So you needed to show your vitality as a woman. So your grace, your beauty, your ability, all of that went well. And whenever a festival happened, there generally tended to be an uptick in marriages, not just because of when it was being run. Most of the time, you didn't have festivals at that period where it was going to be cold. People couldn't be outside. Buildings were large, but they weren't superdomes. They weren't these huge, magnificent places that we could all get together and have 100,000 people celebrate. They just didn't have that kind of size unless it was an open air amphitheater like the Colosseum or something along those lines. And even then, again, you would be doing that during the springtime, the fall. You'd be doing that during the summertime when it's warm and it's comfortable and you could have these activities, not when there's snow or it's cold and miserable and you need to cram everyone together. So a lot of these festivals, like a modern Renaissance fair, were open air events. Let's talk about some of the other sporting events that they were doing. You had jousting, and a lot of people these days think jousting is a central activity. It's what everyone was coming to see, and that's just not true. Jousting was exciting and it was an adventure, but it was never the main focal point of an event. For one, it was expensive. You would get these horses, and horses, especially war-trained chargers, were a treasure. You did not needlessly risk these animals often because it took years to train them to trust their rider. It took years of training to get them to run the stays and to do all of the commands that you needed that horse to do so that you could trust it with your life. You had accidents that did happen. Sometimes you had malicious acts that would happen where people would poison the animals or they would intentionally stab the animal. They would aim intentionally for the knight on the back. You're trying to dismount them anyways. And at this time, 1494, not all jousters had shields. Sometimes they were showing off some of the new plate. It was better protected. It was better armor. It was thicker. And so it could take the hits. And it showed your bravery not to have a shield. It also showed your stupidity, in my opinion. But I'm not alive at that time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this video. So, jousting was not a focal point. It was just not as big as we think sometimes that it was. But your armored combat, that was huge because you could bludgeon a person absolutely silly and they're not going to die. Even back then, stabbing was not a thing that you did. You're not trying to hurt your opponent. You're trying to establish dominance. You're trying to show off your abilities. And killing your opponent during the competition, that doesn't look good. You know, no one will compete against you. And that means you're not going to get the honor and the prestige that you're looking for if no one will fight you because they know you're going to try to kill them. So armored combat was a big thing, showing off in that way. They had fencing, a different style of it, but the mastery of the sword, especially because the rapier was such a big and popular weapon among nobility, showing off your fencing abilities was huge. So they would have little competitions of that. They would have debates where they would be arguing back and forth and people would vote on who they thought did better in the debate, and it would give people something to talk about. These ideas, these changes. You had a very popular and in my opinion silly, but in Italy specifically, one of their more popular events is they would have their men on their horses and they would be standing in the saddle and they would basically play chicken with the wall is what they would do. They would stand on their horse, they would have their lance, and they would go as fast as they could straight at a wall. And whoever could get the closest before veering off, and whoever could get closest without damaging their lance or, smacking into the wall, they showed their bravery. They were showing their ability as well in the training of their horse. There were horrible accidents where horses who trusted their riders way too much would just bam, right into the wall. It was terrible. The people loved it. You're taking the risk yourself. They don't want to see regular people get hurt, but there's a thrill to seeing people get hurt. It just happened, especially back then. So you had to be careful. It was an extremely popular thing to do. You didn't have to wear armor, so you could have all of your flowy clothes, and you could have your ribbons, and you could have your hats, and all of these things. You could show off to the pretty girls that were up in the stands. Like, people could see you too. You're already on horseback, so you're higher than most people, but then you're standing on horseback. No one's missing what you're doing, so you are a wonderful focal point. It gives everyone an opportunity to celebrate and see how brave and courageous you are. Much like these days, you ride a motorcycle, you see someone standing on the seat, and they're just like, I'm king of the world, and you're just like, you're an idiot. Same thing. It shows how brave you are. There's a thrill to risking your life. Always has been. So there was no difference for the time. And that's kind of a comparison. I would definitely say the biggest difference is that our events are safer. Our food is more edible. They don't take as many risks. But as far as the goals behind it, as far as why people were gathering, they're still very similar. Just like then, everyone's getting together to see wares. They're trying to see what they can purchase. They're trying to be entertained. And that's what Renaissance festivals of the Renaissance era were doing as well. A gathering place of people to exchange ideas and to propagate the ways that things were changing and to show off. Hopefully we get to see you at our event. We hope your history is as fun as our history, and we look forward to seeing you there. Huzzah!